And welcome to episode number 2 of Diabetes and PAD. And you might be wondering why diabetes and PAD? Well, even one extra sugar molecule in your blood could end up wreaking havoc on your artery walls, particularly in those smaller vessels below the knee. And it ends up limiting the circulation in your leg. Once that plaque gets all built up in those damaged areas, and you end up with the poor circulation known as peripheral artery disease or PAD. It's really important if you do have diabetes, even pre-diabetes, and your doctor tells you that you have a little bit of neuropathy, numbness, the tingling, and oh, it's just your diabetes. It's worth going to the Global PAD Association's website, padhelp.org, and learning more about PAD, and go to padtest.org and find a clinician in your area or physician in your area that can test you for PAD. 1 in 3 diabetics over the age of 50 has PAD, so it's worth getting tested now versus waiting until you are a toe stub away from amputation. In this particular episode, which is co-hosted by the amazing Mark Brezzell. He is the author of A Matter of the Heart, My Unexpected Journey with Diabetes. We are turning the tables on him, and he is going to talk about his book, why he wrote his book, some of the learnings, some of the takeaways from his journey with diabetes. We're sharing it with you. I hope you can pick up his book from Amazon and then use this as a little bit of a book club, right? And hear a little bit more about the reasons why he wrote different aspects of it, a little bit more meaning to some of the phrases in there. So we're going to talk about it right now. We're going to get a little bit more insight into the book, the different chapters, the lessons learned. And then once you pick up the book, you're going to be able to be even more in the know. And it might help you, you never know, with your journey with diabetes. So thank you so much, Mark Brezzell. We really appreciate you being here. And thank you for letting me read your book. I
Thank you
actually
for
read it
reading the book, actually.
twice.
Thank
Well,
you.
that's good. It's a really, for those people, it's a quick read.
Hmm.
Very, very simple chapters, uh, easy to pull the takeaways. What I also love is that you have these discussion points and
Hmm.
thought-provoking questions in there, which I was actually inspired. I don't have diabetes, but
Hmm.
it still was really great to take those questions and really think about them, especially putting myself in the shoes of my patients who have diabetes and
Hmm.
PAD and thinking about the journey that they might be going through.
Absolutely.
But I want to start with, so you end up with diabetes. What, and you had this crazy journey, right, of self-discovery through the process.
That's right.
But what was the catalyst for actually writing a book? You have millions of people with diabetes, and
Yep.
very, very few people take the opportunity to actually put their lives out there and be vulnerable.
You know, it actually started last year. What happened was I bumped into an old classmate of mine. He's actually a school principal. Actually, I think he's a superintendent. And we just got to talking, and he was telling me about, his brush with death. And I'm like, huh? And he says, man, I was struggling with diabetes. I'm like, really? He said, I had acute kidney failure. I lost all this weight. I was, it just came out of nowhere, and it just kind of caught me by surprise. And he would just, give me his experience. I'm like, my goodness, this is crazy. And I think that kind of sparked in me the desire. I mean, because the thing he said, he didn't even know he had diabetes. He said that when they told him he had diabetes, he was completely shocked. He didn't know what was causing all of his problems. And that's when the kind of light went off in my head saying, I wonder what relevancy would it be for me to share my experience, because just listening to him and the pain that he was going through and what he had dealt with emotionally as well as physically, I just said, when I look at the books in the bookstore and on Amazon or online, when I go to Barnes and Nobles, when they talk about diabetes, they don't really touch on the psychological component of this condition. They focus so much on the pathophysiology. I know what diabetes is. I know it's maybe people don't understand the differences between the type 1 or type 2 or some of the intricacies involved in that. But the bottom line is that there's two things that I really want to highlight in the book. One is that this is a very emotionally packed condition. You deal with the physical, but you're also dealing with this with the psychological. And I think that many times our networks aren't really prepared for that. They expect us to deal with the physical component of this, but I don't think that they truly understand the psychological component of it. So that was one. And two, I just felt that, you know, we need it's for such a condition to be so prevalent. I remember when I used to start going to the clinics, and I would sit in those clinics and I would see people that I mean, just it's just ravaged by this condition. You talk about PAD, you talk about, and just in general, I mean, some of the health of some of these individuals were just so poor. And it talked to people, and then a lot of people will tell you, I didn't know, or I didn't know I was dealing with this thing, or what, it caught me by surprise. So I felt that education was critically important as well. And so one of my goals of the book was to challenge people. If you see something that's not right or different or doesn't make a lot of sense, the very simple thing is to go get it checked out. I rather them tell me that there's nothing wrong than for them to tell me, I wish we have seen you sooner.
Mhm. And it's interesting, your very first reflection question in the book on chapter 1, what signs or symptoms in your own life have you overlooked or downplayed thinking that they were insignificant? And
Right.
how did you eventually confront them? And I see this as something that not only relates to diabetics, but it's also, right, for people who have any sort of symptom that
Right.
might be out of the norm for them, that
Absolutely.
so many people
That's
brush
right.
off and they make excuses for,
That's right.
especially the number one is fatigue.
Yeah.
And then they look and they think, okay, well, maybe I just didn't get sleep last night. Oh, you know what?
Mm-hmm.
I've been a little stressed, or I've
Mm-hmm.
had a little bit more anxiety lately.
Right. That's right.
And you're afraid to go to the doctor because that is the one thing you really don't want to hear from the doctor is,
Exactly.
oh, you have so much stress, you have so much anxiety, that's what's causing your fatigue.
That's
And they
right.
just brush you off without any further exploration to see, for
Right.
example, if you might have your vitamin B is
Right.
not absorbing, your
That's right.
homocysteine levels might be through the roof, which all may indicate something
What's going
else
on?
is going on.
That's right.
And so
That's
it's
right.
really important that you go, not only go,
Mm-hmm.
right?
That's right.
It's that you ask the right questions
Right.
and you don't settle for less than exploration.
That's right. Because many times, like you said before, and you've said in other programs, that you have to be your strongest advocate, because sometimes, you just like you said, they may brush you off. um, you know Many times, I hate to say it, but many times, when you are an expert in certain areas, sometimes you feel that I think you overestimate the experience of the actual patients that you're dealing with. And you want to break down a textbook response, but you're dealing with people who are dealing with these things from a completely different level and different perspective. And so it's a little bit different. So many times you're like, well, it's not a big deal. Or I think you just need to change this or do this. But and if they come back and say, hey, nothing's really changed, and just being persistent, I think, helps as well.
So I'm curious in terms of the title is always a big deal. And
Mm-hmm.
it almost sounds like when I went to start the Global PAD Association,
Mm-hmm.
our 501(c)(3) that we kicked it off with was the weight of my heart, because I looked at the weight of my heart as purely a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
It was my mission, it was my purpose,
Mm-hmm.
it was a
Mm-hmm.
movement.
Right.
right? And
Right.
that's kind of what it sounds like here.
That's
Move
exactly it.
me
Yeah.
through. It is, right?
It,
Talk
it,
talk about
it's
the title.
it's a multi-pronged approach because one, I was clinically trained in, dealing with the heart. I was a cardiovascular perfusionist by training, so the heart was near and dear into in my experience for many years before I transitioned into industry. That was one. Two, I recognize that diabetes and cardiovascular disease are so connected, from that perspective. And I realized that, if you have one, you definitely want to be leery of the other, because of the comorbidities of that. So that was one. And then I guess the final piece is, how bad do you want change? And that's where the heart comes in. Many times some people, when they are diagnosed with a chronic condition, they're so frustrated sometimes they'll just throw in the towel. I'm not, it is what it is. I'm going to die of something. I'm not really going to do anything to better my situation. But for me, I spent years being angry initially, but then you get to a point where you start looking around at others that are dealing with this, and you're like, you know what? I'm not going to go out like this. What can I do to better my situation? And it's a matter of heart, and it's a matter of the heart that you decide that not only do you want to change your situation, but you feel strong enough to really help others. Because when I was, like I said before, when I was talking with my friend and he was telling me his experience, I really felt compelled to, this is not a unique situation that you're dealing with. There's a lot of people that ended up in a hospital being diagnosed with diabetes that had no clue. And as we said before, with diabetes, it's not in a vacuum. Obviously, something was going on prior to presenting into to the emergency room or even being admitted into the hospital. You were dealing with something that you ignored. So I think it's important to connect the dots to help people understand that diabetes does have symptoms. They do have signs. And if you see some of these things, ask questions. Even if it's become paranoid, hey, but get it checked out. I'd rather than rule it out. It's just a blood test. Rule it out. Then
Talk
deal
about
with
those
the complications.
symptoms.
Well,
I want you to talk about the symptoms because one of the things that stood out to me in the book is where you discuss the constant craving for sugary drinks. And
yes,
you, quote, said
yes,
that you felt like a lush. And I
yes,
had to go back and read that a couple of times to go,
yes,
okay, wait a minute. I'm
yes.
trying to find the alcohol connection because usually lush means
That's right.
alcohol. But then it was like expanding on your obsession
I,
with Sodapop.
I would drink those big liters, 2 liters. I would just drink those down probably at a couple of settings. And I would have 4 or 5 or 6 of them, and I would just guzzle, guzzle, or I just sip on it all day. What people do with water, that you're supposed to sip on water. I just had the desire. Exactly, I had the desire to. I did the same thing with very sugary pop, and what. Welch's grape was, if you look at it at the time, it wasn't modified to, reduce the sugar like many of the pops are today. It was still up there, 50 grams per. And so,
And your wife actually noticed this.
yes,
You say that she
yes,
approached you several times
absolutely.
and was thinking, what are
What's
you doing? Why do you
what's the
have
matter with
these
you?
sugary cravings? This is
Exactly,
abnormal for you. Are
exactly.
you just purely thirsty? Was
Yeah,
it a thirst or a craving for sugar?
it was a craving. It was a craving. It wasn't just a thirst. I would drink water, but it was a craving. I needed it. I won't say it was a high, but it was just it's that was the only thing that would satisfy my palate is drinking something sugary. And it just so happened I liked the great pop, but it was just crazy for me because growing up, the weirdest thing about me is growing up is I had a lot of allergies as a kid, and so I didn't really eat a lot of foods, and I definitely didn't eat a lot of sweets because of the foods that I was allergic to. So it wasn't like I was growing up with this huge desire for sugary things. I didn't even eat cake until I went to college because I was allergic to eggs. So, it's just kind of a bizarre type of thing for me. So it wasn't like I grew up on all this stuff. But when as I got older, I started eating more and more. But when I became a diabetic, the first symptom was again sugary drinks. Just drinking. The other was occasional fatigue. I remember that I would come home from work. Again, being in a hospital, I used to work a lot of some long hours sometimes. If I was on call, we would have cases that didn't go as well as we wanted to. They can go well into the night, and that was no big deal. That was something we were used to. But there were points where after work, I would go home and I would just be completely wiped out. Where in the past, I'll get up at 5, be there all day, can be helping my partners if there's a bad case, can leave the hospital at 8. No big deal. But this, was a little bit different. And I think that some of the little cues when I look back on that, I remember that I was taking a nap and the phone rang and it kind of started me out of my sleep. And I jumped up to go answer it because it was somebody I was trying to, I was waiting on a phone call from. And I just saw this aura. It's like my eyes, somebody was shining a flashlight in my eyes. It was just this brightness. It was a daytime and it was just this brightness. And it took me a minute and then it kind of settled down and I answered the phone, but it just kind of it slowly waned and it slowly went away. And I thought that was a little bizarre. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I thought maybe, just started out of my sleep. I didn't really put two and two together at that time either. So, but it's the classic symptoms. It was that going on. But the main thing was the unexplained weight loss. I was starting to lose weight. I noticed that my clothes started getting a little bit larger. I wasn't that big a guy to begin with, and I was just losing. My wife was noticing it. And it was actually my sister-in-law who notices everything. She said, "Mark, you're losing a lot of weight. You okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine. Leave me alone." But
I mean, you're sitting here thinking though, and it's understandable that in
mm-hmm.
your book you say you really thought you were living your life right. You
Yes,
you thought you were doing everything right. Here you
yes,
were working in medicine.
yes,
You knew the risks for diabetes and other diseases and things like that out there. And
yeah,
so you were consciously really trying to eat what was good for you. And yet you
exactly.
ended up with diabetes.
Yeah,
And I think that played into your potential denial, which I want to get into
yeah,
as well.
yeah. It did. Um, Another interesting component of all of this that I don't know if I necessarily put a lot in my, and I don't know if I put it in the book, but I was actually talking with one of our anesthesiologists, and we went to a conference, and he was just saying, "Hey, Mark, they were really talking about ways to really reduce and improve the outcomes of diabetic patients undergoing cardiopulmonary bypass." And I said, maybe we can tighten some things up. Maybe we could put together a protocol that that you guys could use to see if it helps improve their outcomes and so forth. And so I said, yeah, that's a great idea. So we tried to put some things together, came up with some protocols, some algorithms, and that sort of thing. And what's rather interesting about all that is that I started doing a little bit of extra reading on this, and so it's funny how you start doing this prior to me even exhibiting any symptoms. And when I started to exhibit symptoms, I never ever defaulted or thought this is what I was doing.
Yeah, I want to talk about that just a little bit also
Yeah,
about just the denial that something may be wrong and how
right.
it truly did prevent you from going down to the store
Mm-hmm.
and getting that first test. I mean, you talked a lot about that in the book, and you said, I just couldn't bring myself to doing it. There's no way I would have ever imagined that I would be dealing with this at
Yeah,
all. It just couldn't be.
yeah,
I don't know what it might be, but it
yeah.
can't be that.
Well, my brother was a diabetic. But his diabetes, like I think I told you before, he received a cortisone shot when he was in the military, and 3 weeks later he was in the hospital with diabetes. It just knocked his pancreas out. It's the most bizarre thing. So I did not look at this as a family history. I just said, well, this was a one-off, uh, kind of a rare reaction, so to speak. And my dad did have type 2, but it was very, very late onset. He was 68 years old at the time. So there was, I guess you could say, a family history. When I started thinking about it, I started looking at my grandparents. One of my grandmother on my father's side did have diabetes. So I began to, you start putting two together. But at that particular time, I really wasn't examining outside of my brother any family history because my mother was fine and my dad, he didn't get in until later. So I'm 31 years old. I was young. I was a young man. I'm like, this couldn't be. I said, if anything, I need to go and check and make sure there's not anything else going on seriously. But diabetes, nah, that's not it.
Once you did, pages later, after you talked about the denial and ultimately the catalyst for going and actually picking up the test and saying, shoot, you know what?
Yeah.
This is it's gonna be it. You go to the doc. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. Where I began to really put the two and two together was one day I was, the way our cycles worked. When you're on call the night before, you're available for any emergencies or anything that's going on, and then usually if you go into the hospital that morning, you what they call first out, meaning that when I get there, if there's, depending on what the schedule is going on, if it's not that busy, then I usually would go home early. So maybe it was around 9, 10 o'clock. I decided, I'm done. I didn't have really anything to do. My partners were there. So I was heading home. Well, I went to the bathroom and I said, well, and I wasn't thinking anything of it. Got in the car and I was halfway home and had to go back to the bathroom again. I'm like, I just went to the bathroom, and I'm not even home yet. And so I'm zooming, I'm like, man, I got to find somewhere to go to the bathroom. And so in my mind, that's when it dawned on me, something about this isn't right. Of all the things that I was dealing with, that was the moment of reckoning, because I've talked to my colleagues that, I knew what the symptoms. I said, okay, when that happened, that's when I start. That's when the light just not even the light, the beacon, the the spotlight. I'm like, are you kidding me? And so that's when I actually went to Rite Aid at the time, which was still in business, and I went there, and you went to the bathroom, and in the process decided, what, just for the heck of it, I'm going to test myself and see what happens.
Well, you're a man of faith, and it's weird asking this question, but and I might ask it twice, might ask it again later in a sense, in a different context. But being that man of faith, I would almost imagine that every morning, every night, at the point you start kind of realizing this, you're like, please, dear God, please don't let it be. Please don't let it be. Please don't let it be.
That's right. No, that's absolutely the case. And not only was I pleading that not let it be, but when I found out that it was, I was very upset.
Yeah, I mean, it was saying, you said in your book, just pages later, after you talk about the denial and talk about how you waited and waited and waited to get that diagnosis, and then you get it on the home test, and then you go to the doctor and it's actually confirmed, and you start into this emotional roller coaster from devastation to anger to, and this is what struck me. Yes. A pure sense of injustice.
Yes.
And part of that had to be exactly, and part of that I would have imagined was you had issue with God at that moment.
I had issues with everyone, including God. And it's interesting because my mindset was, I'm in the hospital dealing with patients day after day. I see what their lifestyle is. And I'm like, I'm trying to do this thing right.
Right.
I was trying to be exercised. I was trying to watch what I eat. I wasn't eating French fries and milkshakes every day. I'm like, I tried to really live this thing. In fact, not only did I try to live it, but I even, through my churches and so forth, I would even do health presentations, not specific to diabetes. I did a lot on cancer, did some on cardiovascular disease, but still diabetes was part of it. And so I talked to people about it. I tried to encourage people about it. And it was just such a gut punch.
And you mentioned that why me mentality, and you did mention that in your book as well. How did that at first, I mean, especially this roller coaster and the why me mentality in particular, how did that hinder your ability or delay the start of healing, of treatment? And what was the catalyst for actually changing that? Because that mentality did change.
I was angry again, and I was a little bit bitter. I know that my wife would sometimes wonder why am I so. She said that my psyche changed a little bit. She said you're always so happy-go-lucky, but now you just seem to be so uptight and stressed and angry. And I think my mentality started to change after my first child was born. Because my wife, she was pregnant around October, November that year, and we going into February. As I was dealing with this emotional roller coaster ride, when I saw my child was born the following year, in October of the following year, and I said to myself, I can't keep this roller coaster up. I still was upset from time to time, but seeing my child, I think that was the beginning of me looking at things a little bit differently. I can't, okay, it is what it is. This is what I have. I can't be upset as to why, because that's not going to change the now. I have now a child. I was still new in my marriage. So I began to start to retrospect and kind of unwind and kind of download and kind of recognize, listen, I can't, this is destructive behavior, and it's not going to be a benefit to my child. So I said, I have to kind of change my attitude.
And I love this on page 14, where it says in your book, one thing I gathered from this crazy experience is that indeed there is a God. This was not some lucky set of circumstances, but truly a divine encounter.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, that came from
So you went from angry with God to suddenly, I mean, that's a huge shift to calling it a divine encounter.
That was a result of my first hypoglycemic episode experience. My father, my father was living in Michigan, and my brother contacted me and told me that they were rushing him to the emergency University of Michigan hospital. And so I was going to go up there to check in on him. So I got in the car and was about to drive up there. And my wife came onto the garage and she saw me. She thought I left, but I hadn't left yet. And I was sitting in the car and she thought that I was just upset. My dad was in the hospital. She thought I was just sad. So she came out there, you want me to drive you up there? And I kind of, was a little responsive. I said, sure, that'd be fine. And so she got the kids together and then we got ready to go drive up there. Well, what happened was, or I should say what was going on was my sugar had dropped. This was the first time I was actually dealing with this. I had never dealt with hypoglycemia on that level. And I was almost incapacitated. What it was is I dropped my keys on the floor. And so I'm just sitting there and everything was I was just kind of out of it. And so she got in the car. She was thinking I was just upset, but actually I was hypoglycemic. And so we were on our way. We got up over the Michigan line. And I just told her, I said, I don't feel good. Maybe I should go to the hospital. And so we turned around and we were going to go find the hospital. But at that time, my sugar was so low that I was incoherent. So she wasn't familiar with it. We lived down there, but where the hospitals were, she didn't go down there that often where that was. And so I was confused and trying to tell her how to go to the hospital. She didn't understand. She had never seen hypoglycemia before. So she was trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And I was out of it. So I really couldn't give her any guidance or direct. It was a total mess. And, because she wasn't that great with directions, and this was before, and so I grabbed the GPS and I said, I know where the hospital is, but I didn't know what was going on. I was just acting crazy. My kids were trying to get the GPS away from me, and they're like, Dad, and they didn't understand what was going on. And it wasn't until I actually passed out, then they fully embraced the fact that, wait, wow, he's not good. There's something going on with him, because I just basically passed out. And so my wife she was able to get the GPS and was trying to find her way to the hospital. But had gone into an area that she was totally unfamiliar with. And we were like out in the middle of nowhere. And she she was just fearful. She was like, trying to find a house, because it was a gated community where we were. She was trying to find somewhere where she can, call somebody or someone can help. We finally ended up at a gas station, and she thought it was closed because it was late at night, and there was three guys that were there. And she's like, my husband, it needs help, and they just happened to have a cell phone. They gave her the phone, and they called the paramedics, which got there relatively quick. But the way things worked out, because even those I talk about there has to be a God, is like we were looking for these three individuals, and after everything it happened, they were nowhere to be found. It was like, where am I? Where are we? My wife didn't really know where we were, but we told them where, paramedics, where they were. They came, they resuscitated me. They said my sugar had drifted off to, I think it was 39. That's how low it was. And it took three of them to resuscitate me, because I was combative. And they finally were able to, hook me up to IV, and they finally were able to, inject me with with the ampules, and I started just responding, and that just basically came out of it like nothing happened. And I'm like, why am I in the back of an ambulance? What's going on here? And they're sitting there, they're sweating a little bit, because they had been dealing with me. I had no clue. My wife was scared to death. And I was like, what happened? And they said that your sugar, that you were right there, guy. And but we were able to bring you back. And they said, you need to go to the hospital. I said, no, I'm fine. I came right out of it. And after that, I came to the conclusion and said, this is this was not just a lucky scenario. So that's when I made that statement, because I said, there's no way in the world that you could just attribute that to just straight luck. I mean, that was a recipe for disaster, but yet I still was able to come out of this thing unscathed. And it was just kind of a weird dynamic. And I'm like, wow.
There was also in that same scenario where you say that you came to realize that this walk with diabetes is a walk of sheer resiliency. And
Yes.
that's a theme throughout the rest of the book, all the way up until just before, I think, second to last chapter, where you have a reflection question that says, how has your perception of resilience evolved through the challenges that you face, and how can you apply this understanding to managing your health journey?
Yes.
It's all about resilience.
That's right. The matter of the heart.
And it's going from resilience is about getting from that why me mentality to what can I do?
What can I do to improve my situation? What can I do to maintain my situation? What can I do to make sure that those episodes are few and far between? Managing your sugar, being more on top of what's going on, taking better care of yourself, watching your diet, all of the things that are necessary in the trek of a diabetic, making sure that I align myself with that and not taking things for granted. and also put my wife through that. I mean, you think of what you may be going through, but again, what I focus on in my book as well is that you impact directly those that are around you, your network, whether they're your family, whether your friends, or you have a direct impact on them, and so you almost, in some respects, have to do what you can do to even reduce their stress because you're not the only one that can be put into a very stressful situation.
And so, talk about the roadmap to combating diabetes. So, we say that you go from the why me to what can I do about it and start doing something about it. And in your book, you talk about, starting on page 36, the 8 principles, the
Yes.
8 health principles that
Yeah.
seem so simple. And if you're first looking at them, you're thinking, okay, Captain Obvious. Um, dive into these a little bit, because if you do first glance at them, you see fresh air, water, sunshine, rest, exercise, trust in God. I mean, you're thinking, should I even bother to read further into this? And
Yeah.
I was actually pleasantly surprised by some of the real tangible, heartfelt um, expansion of in each one of these
Yeah.
that was very personal to you.
Well, the thing about it is what I have to recognize again when I talk with my diabetes educators, when I read other books on diabetes, again, the focus was so granular. It was basically so singular in so many respects. Change your diet, or it's all diet related, diet, or maybe exercise. But when I recognize that as humans, there's more to us than than one or two components. And I said the best way for us to improve ourselves, when you think about diabetes, exercise is so critically important. Like you talked about your campaign, walk, the best way to tackle PAD is to walk through the pain of PAD. And that's all part of exercise. Not only walking through the pain of PAD, but when you get out there and you walk and you breathe in the oxygen and the fresh air and the sunshine, the stronger you are as a full person, the more resilient you are to be able to offset many of these conditions that befell us. And so that's where I'm coming from. You need to get a lot of rest, because if you don't sleep, rest is where your body recuperates, where your body heals, where if there's any challenges that you were beset with, throughout your day, your body has the ability to heal itself overnight. And if you reduce that time frame, you further set yourself back, because now instead of taking a good 8 hours, 7 hours of sleep, you only sleep in 2 and 3 hours. That's only 2 or 3 hours of time for your body to recuperate and heal itself. So all of these components, one after the other, sunshine, and like I said, the vitamin D, the energy that when you're out there, your body holistically responds in that environment, in a fully natural environment, running and walking and drinking fresh water every day. And your body needs to be hydrated. So it's a total package as far as restorative and healing and maintaining. And so I found out that, if I'm healthy, if I'm able to offset this through this, all of these principles will help you maintain premium health. And the healthier you are, the more resilient you are, the faster you bounce back from challenges that you might be beset with. Because as a clinician, one thing I knew is that many of the people that came into the hospital, dealing with cardiovascular disease, many of them were smokers. Many of them, whether they had a genetic propensity or if it was but a lot of times it was lifestyle related battles that they dealt with was the reason why they were there. And so I said, well, if you are able to reverse that by changing your lifestyle, not just your diet, but also getting out there, just walking from time to time, walking, getting fresh air, getting sunshine, getting rest, and reducing stress. That's why the trust in the higher power for what many people who whatever that may be for you. The fact of the matter is that we have to reach a point where sometimes we just can't handle everything on our own. We have to let some things go, and that reduces our stress, and because stress in of itself can kill by itself. And so that's why I felt that this was important. Even as a diabetic, you'll find yourself in a better holistic state if you're able to incorporate these principles.
My favorite though is number 3, because I think it's just underappreciated, and it's pure sunshine. And I love, and this was the one that really stood out to me, because you think, okay, yeah, go out and get some sunshine, get
Yeah.
some fresh air, right?
Yeah.
But it really is important, because the vitamin D that you take in a supplement form, synthetic, is different than what you get from the sunshine. When you
Absolutely.
go into the details, it promotes vitamin D synthesis, which there are a lot of ailments that are in part caused by or exacerbated by a vitamin D deficiency.
Absolutely.
And you
Absolutely.
say that just stand outside for 5 minutes with the sun on your face, take off your shoes. And this is interesting. Dr. Vincent Rowe, a vascular surgeon from UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, he's the head of vascular surgery there. He was just talking a couple of weeks ago about a patient that was experiencing critical limb ischemia.
Mhm.
And she was able to get herself out of CLI
Mhm.
by grounding, by going out into the grass and walking and feeling the earth, and going to
Right.
the beach and
Yeah.
feeling
Yeah.
the earth, feel the
That's
earth
right.
beneath your feet,
Yeah.
type of thing, which I thought was interesting. But
Yeah.
even more interesting here, and then I'll let you jump in, is in general, scientists think 5 to 15 minutes for an average person, but for someone who's darker skinned, and this is why I think so many
Mhm.
darker skinned
Mhm.
people end up with some of these chronic ailments, is because it's a lot tougher to
That's right.
synthesize that vitamin
That's right.
D, and you need to
Yeah.
stay out in the sun
A little bit
longer.
longer. That's right. Absolutely. Melanin, again, like I said, absorbs a lot of this. And there's some synthesis that's going on, but everybody is different. And even from a demographic standpoint, yes, you can tolerate much more sun, but sometimes, like you said, you have to, be out there a little bit longer, or to really get the synthesis that you need to really help your body metabolize. And so it's a holistic process. I just felt that sometimes we focus on one or two things, and we leave a lot. We downplay everything else, and that may help, but I just always felt that the total picture provides you the most maximum ability for your body to heal itself and to maintain healing. And if you look at many of the comorbidities of diabetes, majority of it can be offset by following these, by doing this, by exercise, by eating, changing your diet, by, all of these principles help prevent many of the comorbidities that we suffer as a diabetic.
And the other thing I want to touch on, which is, and I saved it for last because it's such
Yes.
a big thing, is the diet. And
Oh,
I
that's critical.
find that so many people literally, in a sense, eat around the insulin. So if they're on insulin, they eat around it. And what was interesting with you is you talked about how you were literally eating for health versus
Mhm.
relying upon the insulin to balance out your diet.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how to explain that, but I found that very interesting, because you see a lot of the commercials out there
Mhm.
for the different devices that measure your blood sugar.
Yeah.
And you see these people in a restaurant and they're deciding what to order.
Mhm.
And so they'll see where their blood sugar is, and that's going to be the deciding factor as to what they should order.
Mhm.
You're saying in the book, no, 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 no.
Mhm.
You need to actually focus on eating healthy always, in any way, and
That's right.
unconditionally, no
Yeah.
matter where the blood sugar, no matter
right.
how much insulin you have, and if you can give yourself another injection.
Mm-hmm.
That'll all balance out if you
Mm-hmm.
just are consistent with
Right.
your diet from the very beginning.
Consistent with diet, and also I emphasize moderation, temperance, because many times people say, "Well, it's a boring life because I can't do it." No, you could do all of this stuff. It may not be degraded, but you could. I'm not saying remove everything. We just moderation is the key, because too much of a good thing can be bad. So just you have to be moderate. You have to be temperate, and but you have to be also cognizant of the fact that you want to try to, you can't just overload your system with things that's going to make your body work so hard to break down and metabolize. And that's where you're seeing all these diets. I'm not a dietitian, but I know enough that I am a vegetarian, and I know that fruits and vegetables are always never a bad option. To consume, along with some of the other, the meats and some of the other carbs and the other stuff that are out there. But I know that if you are top heavy with, some of these natural type of foods, that's the easiest opportunity for your body to, gain a lot of energy from eating good, healthy options.
And as we get to the conclusion of the book, I love this statement here because I think that this just ties it all up. You say wellness is a matter of the mind, the body, and the heart.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's about, do you love you? And if you love you, are you going to do what's best for you? And many times sometimes may not be the most popular thing in one respect, or you may say, well, I have to make some changes or some adjustments, but it really comes down to, how much do you love yourself enough to really, not only just for you to exist, but again, I'm married. I want to grow old with my wife. I want to be able to see my children grow up, and well, they're all grown, but I'm saying I want to see them have their families and their children, be a grandfather, a great grandfather, and that sort of thing. And I can't, do that if I'm laid up in a hospital on a ventilator.
That's true. And the one thing that I think would be great in your next iteration and your next book you write is the perspective of your wife
Yes,
and the
I
support
was
of your
thinking about
family
that.
through this journey.
Yes,
We saw in the beginning, but we didn't see that carry through,
right,
which is fine because that is, in a sense, the next book. That's the
right,
next chapter because it's not just you, the people who
right.
love you. It takes a village. I
That's right.
hear so much from my patients that they say, well, I have to cook this for this person in the family and this for this person in the
Yes,
family, and
yes,
my kids won't eat this, my
yes.
grandkids won't eat this, my husband won't eat this,
That's
or my
right.
wife. And
Mhm.
it's like, oh my goodness, in our house, everyone always had the same thing. When my mom was
Mhm.
sick, we ended up eating her diet for Crohn's disease.
Mhm.
Everyone ate what she ate. With my dad with heart disease,
Mhm.
even she adapted to meet the needs. And I still eat for what he needs because I do take care of him. And I think it's important to support one another. And it never hurts because if it's
Absolutely.
healthy for him, it's also going to be healthy for me
That's
and be a
right.
preventative measure, right? But I'm
That's right.
curious from your standpoint, and just to tease us into the next book that you plan to write, what was that like in terms of a support system from your wife when it comes to eating and exercise and sleep and getting that little bit of sunshine every day?
Well, the travesty of it all, and I think I probably should write a book about it to encourage people to be more involved in, is that my wife, I didn't really get into the specifics of diabetes. I don't think she fully appreciated the condition. And it's not until later in my life where, after a few of challenges that occur, where she now begins to, you know, because even now she's like, it's all about what I eat. It's all about, I want to make sure, just don't eat the junk food. Leave that stuff alone, because sometimes you still have bad habits. I'm not going to deny it. You eat a cookie, yes, I eat all that stuff. But the fact of the matter is that, again, moderation is key. I'm not sitting here all day eating cookies. I maybe after I eat a meal, I may have something sweet for after that, but I'm not eating this stuff all day. Now I have snacks and stuff set aside just in case my sugar may dip. I do have that. But the fact of the matter is, my wife now is on full, but she's learning more about the condition. She's learning more about how to cook for the condition. Even back then, she was learning, but I think it caught her by surprise to the enormity of this condition. I don't think she truly appreciated the day-to-day struggle that we deal with, because it's I always tell people all the time, when you're talking about the psychological component of this, think of something that we have to be on our game every single day, all day. And if we're and you could be perfect for 6 days. On the seventh day, you can make a mistake that could be life-threatening. And so that puts a great deal of stress on any individual. As a former clinician, I remember when they first I'm young enough to, or I should say, well, yeah, I'm young enough to remember. Actually, I'm old enough to remember when they started to introduce, universal precautions in the hospital, and we thought it was kind of silly because it was very difficult for us to maintain that level of care, that level of acuity for every single time. That's not human nature. Mm-hmm. And so tell me where the bad stuff is, because I'm not, I know we do the same thing over and over and over again. I get all that, but I still like to know, because when you do certain things, you get comfortable, you get lax. When you do the same thing every day, you're not going to be that intimate as far as the devil's in the details. So I think that that's something that she really truly appreciates, is that it's a very taxing thing, but but you again, resiliency. I know what can happen, so I try to do the best that I can, and I try to be the best that I can, and I try to increase my longevity to the best extent that I can. And my doctors are even somewhat amazed. My last physical, I went to a foot doctor. She says my feet are perfectly fine. I had a little callus in it, and she checked it out. She's like, oh, that's nothing. But she was really surprised. But my A1C was 5.9, and that is 25, almost 26 years as a type 1 diabetic. In fact, my doctor.
Yeah, that's almost unheard of. It's almost unheard of.
Yeah, in fact,
and that's where I also think that it has a lot more to do with the everyone just eating and relying upon the insulin versus just eating consistently. I understand, and you talked about there are cheat times, and you have times where you just got to do what you got to do, and it might be a birthday or whatever it might be, and thank goodness you have the insulin and things like that. But for the most part, it's about the bigger picture, and it's about creating the consistency in your life to manage this disease, because so many patients don't realize. I mean, there are severe complications, and our friend Sally Hendricks from South Africa, the number one thing that, and people should follow him too. He's on LinkedIn. He has some really incredibly powerful content that he's created, and educational resources as a patient to other patients and clinicians and physicians. But what he said is, when he was diagnosed with diabetes, he wished that the first thing his doctor would have talked to him about would have been the complications that can arise and the damage that one extra sugar molecule can cause in your body, and how how diabetes actually really impacts the blood, whether it is the
Hmm.
damage to the
Hmm.
arteries or whether it, making your blood more thick and
Hmm.
syrupy
Hmm.
and making it tough
Hmm.
for the blood to get into those smaller vessels, those capillaries. I mean, it's bad enough it's damaging the artery walls, right? And
And
your
that's
main vessels, your main
exactly,
superhighway. But the
exactly.
problem, which is where I'm so proud of you, and I think that this is so important for people to hear, is that your A1C is below 6, and that's where it needs to be in order for your blood to be able to get through into those capillaries and get to the toes. You hear about diabetic foot all the time. It's a lot of suffering, and a doctor can actually open up the main arteries if in for the most part below your
Mhm.
knee and into your foot. But
Yep.
if you're having problems with your blood is too thick to get through those capillaries,
Mhm.
which are even
Mhm.
smaller,
That's
they
right.
can't do anything about it. The
That's right.
only thing you can do is manage your
That's
blood
right.
sugar.
That's right. That's right. Manage your blood sugar. And I think many times eating foods that facilitate the very thing that your body, that you're trying to, prevent from happening. So, eating beets and berries and foods that facilitate better vascular health. I take as a supplement beetroot, and it just keeps nitric acid, nitric oxide. It kind of opens up the vessels and kind of a vasodilation effect. But I'm just saying, not only do you want to watch what you eat, but try to find foods that help facilitate some of the challenges that diabetes propagates. And it's a multiple prong attack. So I'll try to eat foods that will help to prevent many of the complications that diabetes can propagate and can cause. And I think when you understand that you're eating, as you like I said, as food is medicine, then you begin to recognize that that's a cycle that can maintain really good really good long-term health. And so even if you slip up here, slip up there, certain diets and certain foods that you eat will help to you know kind of calms I should say, push back some of the sins and the slip ups that may occur over time. Because hey, you're human. You're gonna certain things are gonna slide by you. But I think if you really watch what you diet, watch what you eat, on top of applying all of these other key health principles, you'll be amazed on how resilient your bodies are.
You are such an inspiration. For more inspiration, you might want to pick up the book, A Matter of the Heart. You can get it on Amazon. I
Or
believe it's in
Barnes and
paperback.
Nobles.
Oh, you can actually buy it on Barnes and Noble on their
Yes,
website.
online. Yep,
Oh,
it's online. You can.
fantastic.
Yep.
And I assume you have an ebook as well.
Yes, that's on Amazon. Yep.
Perfect.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Mark
Thank
Brezzell. We
you.
really appreciate it. And for those of you who are following along, who watched our first episode, this is episode number 2.
Mhm.
I've really put Mark in the hot seat for the last 2 episodes. But guess
Yes.
what? He is the co-host of
Yeah.
Diabetes and PAD. And
Yes.
next week, he and I are actually going to be interviewing together as
Hmm.
co-hosts the former American Diabetes Association Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Robert Gabe. And you
Yes.
don't want to miss that. We are going to talk to him about the future of diabetes care, the innovations that he's most excited about, and
Hmm.
some of the things that he wishes woulda, coulda, shoulda been done
Right.
already. So
That's right.
you definitely don't want to miss that episode. Follow along. Make sure you like this video.
Hmm.
Subscribe to our channel, youtube.com/, the at sign, the way to my heart. Please subscribe for amazing content like this that you don't want to miss. And you also have the opportunity with every one of our live episodes to ask your burning questions. We want you to participate. We want you to be our third co-host. So make sure you join along, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to join us next week. Mark your calendar because
Yes,
Dr. Robert Gabe, the former chief medical officer for the ADA, is going to be here live to answer not only my questions, not only Mark's questions, but your questions as well.
that's right. Bring all your questions with you.